The presentation ready to go in a moment here. And then I'll just we'll double check that will work in a second here. There we go. Yeah, please and thank you. Okay. Can you give that a try? Yep. Oh, good. Is it okay.
Can you please go to slide 3? Just to make sure that this is the correct version. No, this is the first version. This is.
I can open the other one here.
Okay. It's actually.
That's my criticism.
Uh,
The amount of times I've seen read like these are possible principal residences and they're spelled out.
Where is it here?
It's not-
Oh, there it is. Separate email thread. Nope. Where is it?
Maybe I send out after 2, like after, shortly after this was published.
Yes. That's right. I just there it is. Okay. There we are.
It's the title the same.
Yep. And then I don't have another one.
Presentation, no. No, there is another email it was actually sent to Cheryl, but you were CC'd.
This is the one.
Yeah, I can look. Or I can send,
Yeah, could you send it?
yeah, I can send you the code.
We'll just need a few moments, Your Worship. And then and then you'll have to change the PowerPoints because that won't work. And then just for yourselves, if you send me PDFs, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, actually, I received in PDF.
Okay, so just yeah, maybe let out. Yep.
Send PPTs.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
That's a current. Okay.
We got there.
I think Kevin is waiting in the lobby.
Can you forward him the new link? He doesn't have the new link.
Okay.
Yes, so you'll need to send that to him. And then he'll be good to go. I just forwarded you that as well.
Oh, this is
Yeah.
the new.
So Deepa will have to change slides for you. So yeah, just let her know.
So I'll forward this to Kevin right now.
Please and thank you. And we're just getting Kevin on the line here in a moment.
I guess it's like. Grandchildren, it's probably all just gonna.
Yeah.
We're just waiting for the other consultant to join us. He's just gotten the link here.
Yeah, Kevin.
Here. Do this here, and then you'll just need to press on this to go forward. Let's go back.
The bag and the.
Okay, I think we're ready. So then we are at video. I'm gonna call us to order. It's 6:39. And the town of Smithers acknowledges the Gittenden plan and what's looking people on this unceded traditional territory we live, work, and play. The public is notified the meeting is being recorded and webcast, and notice is on the bulletin board outside these chambers. And there is an agenda council with a supplemental motion to approve this. Councilor Raven, Councilor Yuma, all in favor? Any opposed, and that's carried unanimously. And regrets from Councilor Elliott, he was double booked for this part of the evening. Okay, so I think we're over to you. Yes, thank you. So we're at 5.1 delegation and both items attached here, but Ms. Watson, thanks for being, and we've got Mr. Brooks online, so over to you.
Thanks. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Allison Watson, and I'm joined virtually by Kevin Brooks with McElhaney regarding draft amendments associated with Bill 44's new housing legislation. And Deepa is going to be working the slides. So next slide, please, Deepa. So I'll start this evening with a short presentation as a way to set the table for council's discussion this evening. We'll do a quick recap of Bill 44, specifically what the requirements are for June 30th by the town of Smithers. I'll touch on a bit about the community engagement and some key things we heard, and then go over the draft amendments before we hear some of your discussion and hopefully direction going into finalizing the proposed amendments and starting the formal adoption process. Thanks, Deepa. So diving into it, as you know, Bill 44 amends the Local Government Act, which is the key piece of legislation that gives the town the authority to regulate land use, specifically use and density. It also really marks an end to the ability for communities like Smithers to exclusively zone for single family and duplex zones. So that's kind of the big umbrella of the changes. Within that, looking at the June 30th deadline, there's really 4 key changes for Smithers. The first, which applies to all communities, is there must be one accessory dwelling unit permitted wherever there's a single family residential zone. This box is already ticked for Smithers zoning bylaw, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But for communities over 5,000, there are now minimum base densities specified by Bill 44. In Smithers, it would be the minimum of 4 units based on parcel size. And this is for restrictive zones. So anywhere where there's a restrictive zone, which is any zone that permits single family dwelling or duplex, must now meet this minimum base density of 4 units per parcel. And noting that this density must be automatic and not led by an applicant, and exemptions do apply. So any property that is not serviced by town water or sewer does not need to comply with this piece. The third aspect of the legislation is communities must consider siting consideration changes. So things like setbacks and height and parking and all those other bits that go into a land use zone. And there's a provincial policy document to provide some ideas and guidance. And then finally, as you know, there's been big changes to public hearings. So specifically prohibition on public hearings where residential land use changes are consistent with the official community plan designation, as well as amendments associated with Bill 44 changes. So next, Steve is gonna get to the map. Okay, so getting down into it, the zones impacted primarily kind of the big flashing lights would be what you see in yellow. These are the single family residential zones in Smithers where the principal use is restricted to single family dwelling. In addition, the zones that will be changing are going to be proposed to be changing are so R1, but also R2, which is shown in the orange. R2A, which is a spot zone, that's across from the college. The Smithers Community Services Cluster Small Homes, that's that. And then also shown are the A1 or agricultural zones. Many of these parcels will be exempt because they're unserviced or designated for other things like airport. So just kind of a lay of the land, we'll be talking about zones again in a couple of slides, but really just to note like where the yellow is on here. So while Bill 44 does set the base density, there is some choice in housing types and siting considerations that you get to make as a community. So to get direction of this, we went to the community to really get a sense of like what the preferences are. Specifically regarding Bill 44, I would say there's been a healthy amount of engagement over the last couple of years for housing, which does provide a good base to work from. So activities included a community survey, which was open to everyone, where 23 people participated. We hosted 2 in-person meetings where there were 24 people that attended. And the goal of the in-person meetings were really to bring together people who regularly use the zoning bylaw in order to have a more technically focused discussion on use and the siting and kind of really get into those details. So I would say we had a great cross-section of participants. We had realtors, builders, developers, interested homeowners, advisory planning commission members, and some members from council. So in terms of themes that came up, there is an engagement summary attached to the agenda this evening. But there were kind of 4 kind of things that bubbled to the surface. The first kind of general thing was just the support and recognition for the need for more small scale housing, specifically diverse housing to meet diverse housing needs, and that this is not something new. This is a thread that has been kind of there for a long time in the community. The second bullet down there, and if I was to kind of double click and highlight something, this would be a big one going into this, was really the desire to maintain neighborhood character. So wanting to kind of keep the aesthetics and massing flow of what you see in kind of our traditional neighborhoods quite similar. The third point that came up quite a few times were just some questions around servicing infrastructure. So what is the capacity? Is there services to accommodate the new density? And how will that be communicated to the development community? And then the last piece there was a discussion around the other factors that go into the development process. So zoning is really one piece, whereas other aspects like market conditions, cost of building, insurance on carriage homes, and land availability are all kind of color the picture of how and why something might get built. So this is a highlight of the zoning changes in the proposed amendments this evening. Ms. Chandran's report really does a nice job of capturing all the details. And to avoid staying out of the weeds too much with this, I'm going to keep it somewhat high level, and if we need to refer back, we can do that. So as far as the amendments, so looking at the zones, right now the proposal is to amalgamate R1, R2, and R2A into one zone. So it's a low density residential zone with some minor text amendments to the agricultural zone, but also the rural residential zones, which currently aren't serviced, but it's just to kind of have that base covered, and in the future they are. Looking at density and use, something that Ms. Chandran actually summarized nicely in one of our meetings was, in the single family zone, you can actually already have 3 units. You can have a single family home with a carriage house, a suite, or a carriage house and a suite. So, the density increase to 4 units a parcel isn't a huge jump. It might feel big, but might not be. But the proposal is to add the definition, in addition to permitting 4 units, add the definition of a quadplex. We heard from the meetings the idea of like, well, what if there was a house that looks like a house, feels like a house, but it has, you know, a common entrance with a couple of suites or apartments in, right? So that's on the table for consideration. As far as setbacks and coverage, some minor adjustments going into the new proposed zone. So a slight bump from 40 to 50% of what exists in a single family zone. It's a very modest change. In contrast, the R3 zone, which is kind of the apartment zoning, you can have a 75% parcel coverage. So it's still on the low side. And then, oh, sorry. Thanks, Deepa. And then for setbacks, there's some modifications in terms of where parking goes. We can dig into that if we need to. And then for height and parking, really no change in the new zone. Parking was brought up a couple times as needing to stay the same. And some discussion around kind of where variances would be considered versus not, but also keeping the height the same, which is an important piece too, when you're thinking about the massing of a building. So, yeah, thank you, Deepa. Looking at the OCP amendments, the document has text amendments basically for consistency with the zoning bylaw, but no map designation changes, as well as no changes proposed to the forming character development permit area guidelines, which currently apply to any building with 3 or more units in the building. And again, we heard just forming character and maintaining that look is really important. So that is the kind of the Coles notes summary. We'll shut down the presentation and bring Kevin Brooks, be able to make his face really, really big so we can all see him. Kevin was the lead for the zoning changes. I headed up a lot of the OCP and community engagement piece, and Deepa was involved with everything. So between the 3 of us, we hope we can clarify and answer your questions and then get some good council direction to move forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Allison, and we almost have Kevin really, really big, so. give a second. There we go, now you're really, really big. Okay, and over to you, Mr. Brooks.
Nice seeing you all, Mayor and Council. So I don't have anything to add to Ms. Shannon's report, and the presentation by Allison have summarized all of the proposed amendments that we do have for you. I'm certainly here for any technical questions or any concerns that council may have, and to address some of those questions.
Okay, thank you for that. So council, let's start. I saw Councillor Patterson's hand, so I'm gonna go there first and I'll try to keep track as we go. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just curious if you could comment on the forming character. He said you would underline that and bold that. It was just interesting because we were actually talking about that earlier today, specific to commercial. So I was just curious if you could speak more about that, if you have one to share. Thanks.
Thanks. What we heard was maintaining the existing neighborhood feel of existing single family neighborhoods was important. So keeping height the same. So it was like having the neighborhood, but then not allowing just like, you know, a 3-story building with 10 units type thing in it. So keeping that feel the same. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. I was just curious if there's any other comments too around aesthetics, I guess, but that makes sense. Height restrictions are, yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, one of the things that we did discuss also was the number of buildings permitted on a parcel in the context of that neighborhood character. And currently, right now, under the zoning, 2 buildings are fundamentally permitted in the zoning bylaw because you can have a principal dwelling, your main home, and a carriage house. And one of the things to reflect some of the comments we heard is keep that to a maximum of 2 buildings that could be actually built under this provision. Also, so to keep, again, the intent is to keep the existing character as what's in the current R1 zone through height and the maximum number of buildings that could be actually sited on a parcel.
Thanks, Mr. Brooks. I'm just gonna comment on that. I see Councilor Rugby there next. We've had lots of discussions at this table about the numbers of buildings, and we vary that on a pretty regular basis because people want greenhouses and storage sheds, and so it might say 2 buildings, but I'm not sure we've ever held ground on 2 buildings. So I think that's important to recognize. People appeal for those variances on a regular basis. So Ms. Chandra.
Thank you to come up, Mayor Atchell. So I believe in the final zoning bylaw that we will be bringing forward on the 28th, we will specify two buildings for residential use, so that there can be other auxiliary structures as greenhouses or storage sheds, so that we won't end up getting a flood of DVP applications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor.
Sorry, I'm just. Apologize if this is a stupid question. Just that I'm thinking of a lot of the single family R1 doesn't have laneway access to fight fires. Is the zoning bylaw going to state how the 2 buildings are to be situated? For example, if you built a carriage house in my backyard, there's no fire access. So is there anything going in there to address that?
And 8x8? Or I think it's okay for you to have a parking lot.
Is that you or me, you or me, Deepa? You want to take a run at that one? So in the bylaw, the way that it's currently written, carriage houses are already permitted in the backyard of the majority of R1 parcels. What the provision is when there is no laneway access, there needs to be access, a clear access provided from the front of the building down the side of the building. That provision already exists in the bylaw. That provision will be maintained as part of the bylaw moving forward.
It was a stupid question. Thank you.
It's not a stupid question. I've got a pile of my own for later, so thanks for breaking the ice here. Anyone else? Councilor Lyon.
I'll jump in here. I appreciate the work that's been put into this, and I'll save my comments about why we're here in the first place, but I'll just go out on a limb and say that I do support what you are proposing, and I think you know it's minimal, and I appreciate that, and I think you know, you've already said it in your presentation that forming character is a concern. It definitely is a concern of mine. And I think going forward, when you're drafting the bylaw, you know, you really have to think about how the future planning of this town should be. And I think just in the little I've heard already, I mean, you guys are totally considering that. So I appreciate the presentation and the information.
Thanks, Councilor Leonard. Councilor Raymond.
I know one of the things that my brain first went to was about the parking, and you guys have done a fantastic job just keeping it as it is, because again, you can't have vehicles all over our roads, otherwise we won't do snow clearing. But no, I just really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the way this is all laid out. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Councilor Raymond. Councilor Buchman.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't even know if this is a fair question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. My understanding is Bill 44 applies to towns with populations of 5,000 or more. Is that correct?
Aspects of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. when I sat in on an open house, I just came away with this overwhelming feeling of this is a need in big population centers, not in small towns like Smithers. And I definitely was concerned by one of the developers who was at the open house meeting I was at, who was concerned about how this might drive up development costs. And I almost sensed a bit of reluctance in him to do future development in Smithers because of these regulations, and that was definitely a concern to me. Do you know what the thinking was behind the government in deciding that it would apply to at least parts of it to towns that are just small like Smithers? Like I said, it might not be a fair question.
You're it, Ellison.
I don't know what the thinking is, but I do know in the realm of housing, it's been a huge issue for a long time, and I think the government is just following the curtails of what other countries are doing for breaking up essentially the R1 zones to encourage that more of a mixed use or more of a housing mix.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, I can add on to that. It's unclear why they drew the line at 5,000. We don't know. I have asked that question myself multiple times. But where the actual bill came from is there's a lot of communities throughout British Columbia that do not even allow secondary suites in any of their R1 zoning. Smithers was way more progressive decades ago than the majority of communities to the south. And so Smithers has been caught in a legislative change, even though it's been one of the more progressive communities trying to facilitate alternative housing forms. But yeah, why they drew the line at 5,000, I've been asking that question too, and no one can seem to answer me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Brooks. Okay, I got a few things, so in random order, because that's not gonna work. So I'm just on this chart. So where it says add quadplex, these are just ideas, so they might not all be questions. I think, following along on the form and character, having some designs of what that means. Because I am one actually who's not so attached to height in certain areas. But if we knew what we mean by quadplex, I think I'm one of the people who talked about, a big house could be 4 units, and you never know. We do see those conversions of big homes in cities. They look beautiful and they house apartments. So I'm not opposed to any of that. I think I would prefer not to see whatever I mean when I say ugly quadplex, so that's my aesthetic. But if we came up with some design guidelines that said this would work. In other communities, there are plans provided that says, this enables you to get through quicker. Here are some agreeable plans. This is going to fit, and you can actually walk through the system a bit faster. So I think that's something we might want to consider, but particularly in the quadplex, if it's going into, what has been a single family home area, it might be nice to give people good ideas on what that is. Again, I'm just going to reiterate, I think in some places going up is fine. When I think about the area that we rezoned, we blanket rezoned R2, like I don't see any reason why we would permit some multi-story buildings. I think at some point we have to go there. So because if I'm following this, R1, R2 are all the same zone now. So we're gonna have to come up with some way to define in some areas, if we have infrastructure to support it, that multi-story is fine. And then I'm with you on parking. I think people are gonna have to figure out a lot coverage for parking. And if we're going 50%, I think this is gonna speak to overall town design. If we're gonna have less space on what was a yard for people to play, how do we compensate for that in our total design in the community so that there's still play spaces? We don't actually deal with that. So where we had lots of conversation at this table when Chandler Park Estates, the second phase was being done, and we missed it. So there isn't playground space in that development. There's very little playground space. Well, there's none yet in Ambleside. And so we've got these big areas where we don't actually have places for people to play. And if we're going to cover more of the lots, like where will people do that? What are going to be the play spaces for people with families? So I think this is just, it's just a challenge, and I don't know how we're gonna do that, if we can come up with some like zoning that actually indicates we're going to make places livable for people too. I'm supportive of a lot of the initiatives here, but I think there's some complexities that we have to figure out. Definitely supportive of like form and character. Then I'm on Ms. Chandra's report. I had some random questions. Oh, just for clarity. So when we're talking about that 280 meter or bigger, like that's a 50 foot by 125. Is that right? Because I think 25 by 125 is a small lot. So do I have my figures right here?
Correct, the 25 by 125 is like half a regular town lot on this side of the town, correct, Mark? Yeah.
And is that 190 or is that 290? That's where I'm getting.
It's 290.
So a 25 by 125 lot can hold 4 homes. Like, I think we have to get our head around that, and then think that that's why my brain has gone to, we have to manage parks and play spaces and places for people to park. Because this just will be, like, people are gonna be able to build 4 homes. We can regulate the square, like the percentage of lot coverage and parking, but at some point, if we're too restrictive, we're gonna get called out on it. That's also my understanding. I just don't wanna be saying things that are wrong, so I'm pausing just to make sure I'm on track here.
Yeah, Mayor Atchell, we share that understanding in terms of if the local government's amendments are too constrictive, like they go above to just chisel away at the unit, what can be developed there. We could be called out, we don't know that, nothing's been kind of hit the courts yet, but that'll play out. And then from the OCP, there really is a strong sentiment to encourage more housing mixes in our communities. To speak to a couple of the points you raised, I think you raised some really interesting points. Not all of them land in the zoning bylaw. So we chatted internally as a team about a lookbook or pre-designs for different housing types. Doesn't need to be quite in a zoning bylaw. Your existing form of character guidelines for multifamily buildings are very good. They're very thorough. I don't think that needs to be revamped or renewed in any way. There's a lot of kind of images that convey the gist of what those guidelines mean. We talked internally as a team around the apartment buildings, and we didn't go there because we really wanted to stick with the spirit of these amendments, which was really about small scale housing forms. And that is not to say an applicant or an owner or a builder can come forward and say, hey, you know what, we have a piece we want to redevelop or develop, we want to rezone it, and they go through the same process as what would typically be. So the OCP designation would change to a higher density designation, and then the zoning would follow, just to have that kind of community process. But it's a good thought, right? Like where are we gonna fit this density should it come? And this is like a cautious first step, the amendments. It's not to kind of start drawing lines on the map of where they should or shouldn't. That's kind of that's why you do OCPs, is to have that where does density go discussion. And then finally, the piece on parkland doesn't necessarily belong in a zoning bylaw. That's really more of a question on a subdivision scale. So when you're doing neighborhood subdivisions, at that point you can, there's a parkland requirement, you can kind of start to tease what that looks like and start to play around with what the community needs and make sense. So hopefully that clarifies kind of things, because I think there's a tendency to kind of trying to shove everything into a zoning bylaw when it just makes it kind of more convoluted and unclear. And the goal is to really kind of be clear and simple and logical versus getting too muddy in the waters.
Thanks for that. I think the reason I brought that up is that we're not gonna do like big subdivisions, right? Like it's mostly built. And so we're gonna be reverse engineering what the town looks like if we want to protect spaces, because we actually don't own them. And so then this is our opportunity to figure out, or at least to be aware that as what is now, you know, what we see even between here and Toronto, which is mostly R2. if it increases in density, we can't actually make that up anymore. We can't come up with other spaces, or we can't create more playgrounds because we don't own it. And so it's just an awareness that we need to figure out or be aware that there are some amenity losses as people lose big yards. And again, I'm not actually opposed to where we're going. But I think we need to be considerate of the downriver effect here. That, you know, neighborhoods, if we were designing them, would have playgrounds and would have consideration for parkings and those public amenities within it. But this is being, this will simply land and people will be able to build whatever fits. So I think when we have an opportunity as the town to create a space to make up for the lost amenity, we need to be aware of that, and one of those is gonna be parking as well. And it was just one other question, this is in Ms. Chandler's report on page 3, and this is point H. And this had to do with the environmental development permit. And it says that these reports, I don't know that we have that many places that this will apply to, but the reports by a designated qualified professional will be required. And I just wondered, is that like a mandatory piece that'll happen every time?
So thank you to Mayor Atchell. So as per the housing legislation, local governments can exempt environmentally sensitive area parcels in environmentally sensitive areas, provided that a qualified professional submits a report confirming that achieving the minimum provincial density is going to have adverse health or safety impacts on residents, and those impacts cannot be mitigated. So, so I had attended, so as part of the PABC organization, I had attended a peer learnings discussion in Terrace last week for planners. So at that meeting, we had detailed discussion on it, and we also had Dawn Listone as the legal expert. So what we learned is it's very difficult to establish a professional to establish that a certain parcel cannot be built to the maximum density because the impacts cannot be mitigated. For instance, if you are looking at the provincial, the floodplain area, so there are ways to safely construct in those areas as well. So there are mitigation measures. So it's very difficult to establish that. So, and also we had this discussion with Kevin and Allison. So what we realized is that at this point, there is no need for the town to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on hiring a consultant to undertake this detailed parcel by parcel environmental assessment. And the other reason is, as part of the OCP, the official community plan, we have environmental development permit requirement for all these parcels. So that is the right stage for someone to come up with the number of dwelling units that can be safely built on that parcel. So it is again submitted by a qualified professional, and that responsibility should be on the property owner and not the local government. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. I think that was it of my chaotic notes. So looking to the table, if there are other questions, Councilor Brandon.
Well, I kind of have a rebuttal to one of your points. I don't want to see us build up over 2 stories. If I wanted to be surrounded by 3-story buildings, I would have stayed in Vancouver. You know, we didn't get any kind of comment or opportunity as council to just voice upon us, and I really appreciate that, but I don't agree with the direction at all that the province is taking. When I hear that we might be getting in trouble if we don't bring it on, because we need to be able to have a discussion instead of having something just blanketed over the whole province. And, you know, it is a good question about why 5,000 people. I don't know how many people still live here because it's a small town, or because they grew up here and they don't have another choice or whatever. But I chose to move here because it's a small town and I didn't like being crowded in. So if I think about my house and now all of a sudden there's 2-3-story apartments on either side, that's not the town I moved to. And I think the changes we're making here are attempting to keep it as close to that small town feeling as we still can. And you know, maybe in the future you know, you've seen what's happened to Kelowna and Kamloops. Where things just develop quickly and then you have to change the rules, but I think at this point in time, we don't have to. There's other ways to address the housing crisis on the demand side. So I just kind of think I don't want to do I think we're doing a good job, but I don't think we need to go over and above because I think we need to maintain the small town feel. And then I can't resist this. You're talking about taking away park space, we're gonna take away park space for a building. So, you know, and you're absolutely right, this is all aimed at densifying without making concordant changes in quality of life. So if every, you know, it's not gonna happen overnight, but if every parcel has 4 dwelling units on it and we don't have any bigger playgrounds or anything, it's not gonna be as pleasant a place to live as it already is.
Thanks, Councilor Ray, and I appreciate what Ms. Watson said about, you know, we're talking about the small housing, but you know, this table has looked at ways to densify in small ways over the time that I've been at council. And so what is currently R2, in my view, becomes a part of that. So we do have other tools where we could incentivize a certain type of development in a different type of town by saying, you know, I'll point in that direction. Let's say if we wanted to have 3-story or 4-story, we can incentivize it in a certain place. We don't have to incentivize it everywhere. I think that's correct. We can actually describe. So we have other tools so that I appreciate what you're saying. We probably don't want many apartment buildings all through town, but we may want them somewhere. And so in order to ensure they go somewhere, we have other tools where we can make that happen. So that's the reason I put it on the table. So I'm not suggesting every part of the town. Let's do that with other planning tools and try to get it to happen where it makes more sense, you know, according to us. Okay. Yeah. Who were you pointing to, Councilor? Oh, Kevin, sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Mayor. Really great conversation, and I think it's all, you know, quite consistent with the overall conversations we're seeing around British Columbia. One of the things we need to keep in mind is this is the first stage of a larger process that we're working on that we haven't really touched base on, but our next step is to begin doing a review of the housing needs assessment for the community. And that housing needs assessment will look at projections. We have to do 5 and 20-year projections for housing for the community. That housing needs also will help us identify what type of units really should be constructed. And I think this conversation about maybe some higher buildings and that really be fleshed out as part of that review and more of a dialogue that we can then have with the community once we've actually done that statistical analysis and that. So I think it's a really good conversation for us to sort of put a pin in and go, okay, let's revisit this once we've had the ability to look at the statistics, look at those projections, look at what actually comes out of the statistical analysis of what type of typologies really may make sense. My feel based on the official community plan work we did is that right now the current zoning plus the zoning that is now going to be in place adequately addresses the housing typology needs for the community, but that may change once we've done a more detailed assessment.
Thank you. Is my memory correct too, that we also have to do some work on understanding our capacity or underground capacity? So we talked about that at one of the meetings, but I'm not sure if that was a requirement or it's just going to be a de facto requirement. Mr. Allen.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Mayor Actual, and that's, I've heard it province-wide as well in other communities about the infrastructure challenges with the legislation. Smithers is affected as well. I don't, as Mr. Brooks mentioned earlier, we were already somewhat ahead of the curve, and our community was designed for that capacity, based on 2 dwelling units for a single family lot. So I'm not overly concerned with. I know we're not going to see this happen instantaneously. It's going to, if it does happen at all, it'll be over time. Definitely, we are in a position to upgrade our engineering studies of the systems of our water, sewer, and stormwater management plans, so. With the funding we did receive from the province, we will be able to go out for RFPs later this year and see if we can undertake those studies with that funding. So yeah, it's definitely a part of the whole puzzle, exactly.
Thanks, Mr. Allen. Okay. Any other questions from council? Ms. Chandra, Mr. Brooks, Ms. Walton, any final things? Thanks again for your work. It's been coming fast and furious, and I've got to say, when I was at the House of Conference, I think in January, and I was hearing so many communities lament the fact that they wouldn't get this work done, because they wouldn't be able to get planners. There are lots of times I count my lucky stars for this community, the talent we have, and the people who like us enough to sign on. That's for you, Mr. Brooks. As big as you are on the wall, so we're fortunate to be able to get through this, so thank you all very much for that work. Okay, I think we're there. And I don't want to make the wrong motion. We're adjourning this one. All right, a motion to adjourn, please. And council, don't go anywhere. Councilor Lee, Councilor Buchan, moved, all in favor? We're adjourned. Take a couple minutes to regroup. Council has to stay.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Hey.
Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Steve.
You're good to go. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I stole a spot. You're right there. You're welcome. Oh, and you're gonna.